Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is fear, and we're fortunate to have with us to talk about the emotion of fear, Dr. CPoe. Dr. Poe is a psychiatrist, and he is also a minister of the gospel. And of course, Dr. Poe, let me welcome you to the show this morning, and to recall that you are an ordained minister and you are a psychiatrist with a Christian perspective, and I think that if we get that in, we shouldn't have any problems from here on in. But Dr. Poe, we're just delighted to have you here. We've had you on a number of occasions, and each time you bring us such excellent information, and we expect that that will happen today. And what we'd like to do today, Dr. Poe, is to talk about the emotion of fear, and to have you to give our audience some information about it and some of the things that about September the 11th and that kind of information. But before we do that, let's have you to give them at least a little information about your background, your education, and some of the things that were important in terms of leading you to Nashville, Tennessee.
Well, I came to Nashville, Dr. Haynes, in 1956 to attend Tennessee State University. I followed my brother, who had preceded me by 3 years, and finished Tennessee State with a major in biology, and then went on to Meharry. In 1960, finished Meharry in 64 with an MD degree, and then did my internship in Chicago, and was in the military in the Army for 2 years, serving in Korea for about 6.5 months. Then I did a residence in psychiatry in Berkeley, California. Then after that, I practiced in Berkeley for about 5 years and came back to Nashville in 76. And since that time, actually I was called to the ministry in 77, and since that time I've attempted to practice Christian psychiatry.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Poe, one of the most important events that has happened in recent American history is the September the 11th, 2001 event. And let's talk about it, because I think historians and sociologists and others have talked about what they call a watershed in American history, and that everything will be different from now on, and etc. But let's talk about that as an event. Let's have you to talk about that as an event itself.
Well, in terms of fear, I think that was a very traumatic event, a traumatic, emotional, psychological, spiritual event. And I think what it did was it intensified the fear of injury and the fear of death that people have to a certain degree anyway. I think the people who were closest to the tragedy perhaps were impacted in some ways the most. But I think it's important that I say that fear, I think, a high level of fear among many Americans was a problem before September 11th, but I think it became even more of a problem after September 11th.
Now, when we talk about fear, and as a psychiatrist, and you're prepared to analyze fear and accept, I mean, what are some of the elements? I mean, how do you deal with that as an issue to make people understand that you as a psychiatrist can see some things in all of these issues that, and of course because of your training and whatnot, but all of these things that we never thought of. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Well, first I'd like to say that fear is not just an emotion. Fear is also a feeling. Fear is also a condition, and fear is also a spirit. As a matter of fact, if you consult the Bible, we find the reference to the spirit of fear. The spirit of fear actually is another word for the devil. And the spirit of fear, therefore, is another word for the adversary. It's another word for Satan. And so there's a certain mystery about fear. It is a very important emotion. It's one of the primary emotions in my view. And oftentimes it occurs in response to a person being in a situation of threat or danger. The fear response automatically occurs, and I think that in many ways it serves as a kind of a signal, as a kind of a warning to the person, to get the person's attention, to help that person examine their situation.
And so that's the emotion of fear. You say it's spiritual as well as emotional, but now in looking at it, how can we deal with that emotion in view of being constantly reminded and told time and time again of the events that cause that emotion?
Well, I think one thing I think we need to say here is that every person on the planet experiences some degree of fear at certain times in certain situations. So the emotion of fear, the feeling of fear is normal, it is healthy. As a matter of fact, there's evidence that supports the notion that people oftentimes become very violent when they somehow get shut off from their capacity to experience fear. Because, see, fear alerts you to danger. And so when we lose our sense of danger, you see, we're much more likely to be overly aggressive. For example, say if two persons get into an argument and the argument begins to escalate. Well, generally when that happens, or as that is happening, each person will feel some degree of fear inside. And the fear is the alerting signal to say, hold off now, calm down, this situation is getting out of hand. So if the person doesn't get that signal, doesn't get that warning, you see, it's very difficult for them to read the dangerousness of the situation.
And so fear can be good as well as bad. Is that what we're saying?
Very definitely, very definitely. Now, I think some fear essentially is healthy and it's good, it's necessary, it's adaptive. The problem is where there's a persistence of excessive fear or a persistence of extreme fear. That's when fear becomes a problem.
Well, could we say that what has happened since September the 11th is leading toward excessive fear? Well, let's look at it from that perspective. If you
yes, I would say the events of September 11th has intensified fear to the point that fear in many people throughout our nation today has become excessive. In addition to that, I think it has also intensified fear in some people to the point that now their fear is extreme. But I think it's important that these people were prone to respond in this way prior to September 11th. Example, if prior to September 11th I was a person of faith, I had faith in God, and I was going to church, and I was trying to live a life pleasing to God, then the events of September 11th would not escalate my fear to the point of extreme or even excessive, okay? On the other hand, if prior to September 11th I was self-centered or pleasure-centered or taking advantage of other people in whatever way, then the trauma of those events on September 11th most likely will intensify my fear to the point of excessive fear or to the point of extreme fear.
You know, Dr. Poe, when you talk about self-centered persons, let's talk about that. I mean, explain to us what you mean when you talk about self-centered, a person, an individual who's self-centered, etc. What's a typical self-centered individual like, so that persons who are watching can say to themselves whether or not they believe that they are self-centered, or they might think that you're talking about using some psychological term that does not apply to them. Talk about it from that perspective.
Right. Self-centered basically means I'm motivated by my desire for pleasure, my desire for comfort, my desire for, oftentimes, for affluent financial holdings. It means that my primary concern is myself. My primary concern is adding to me. And in contrast to being God-centered, or if I'm Muslim, Allah-centered, or if I'm Hindu, Krishna-centered. All right? So there's a polarity there. When I'm self-centered, I'm also pleasure-centered. When I am self-centered, I'm also worldly-centered. Okay? When I'm self-centered, I'm also materialistic. When I'm self-centered, I have myself in the center of my concern, as opposed to having God in the center of my concern.
Very good. And of course, Dr. Poe, let us take this first commercial break, and we'll come back and we'll continue that conversation following this short commercial break.